First they ignore you, then they mock you, then they attack you, then you win. Gandhi. Who is running scared? The attack on gold and silver has increased recently to almost a fever pitch, with all the paradigm puppets trashing gold and silver, like Ben Bernanke, Paul Krugman, Blythe Masters, Warren Buffett, and now Charlie Munger and Bill Gates. I guess after all the market manipulations have been burned out, and no one is left to fall for the same trick in their paper casino, all you're left with is trash talking before the guns come out. In the most recent CNBC interview with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, they again attack gold. The very fact that they're doing this screams of desperation, and one has to wonder, is this the best they've got? Since September 2001, the beginning of our current winter cycle, the smartest investor, Warren Buffett with his Berkshire Hathaway, has barely kept up with real inflation of just over a 50% return over 12 years. And Microsoft has done worse than that. Meanwhile, gold and silver have returned 500 and 600% respectively, and they have much further to go, as none of the systemic problems that have come to light during this winter cycle have been solved. Can you imagine how insane it would be for a gold and silver football team that went undefeated for 12 years in a row, and the worst team in the league that did not even make the playoffs was trash-talking that legendary record? Seriously, how ridiculous would that look? And yet these financial and technological has-beens don't even have the common courtesy to say good game after they get their heads handed to them for the past 12 years. They mock the unproductive nature of gold, but it's sad to think that the productive effort of the best minds in technology and the investment community can't even hold a candle to gold and silver over the past 12 years. I would mock an investor that has been so wrong when it's counted the most. We praised these investors and innovators during the go-go years, but did it really matter? Everybody was making money in the 90s. The investors I respect and listen to are the ones that saw change was happening and changed course before the rest of the world woke up to that fact. Guys like Buffett and Munger are just crony capitalists that made their money through insider deals and then got saved on our back with the bailouts. The more they talk, the less I respect their opinions. And seriously, are these the best spokesmen for this paradigm? Bill Gates starts off his attack on gold with his glowing record on investing in silver.
Gold today was something that both Charlie and Warren made pretty clear they're not a big fan of. What about you?
I'm certainly in that camp. Historically, I did have some silver investments that at a time Warren actually had some silver investments. He got out fairly quickly. You know, I stayed in and did very well on silver. But, you know, gold is a very tough one because it's so psychological.
Gold is not a psychological investment. It is the only sane thing and real in this insane imaginary asset world. To me, the insanity is that we believe this digital wealth actually means something real.
And if central banks or the IMF ever decided to take advantage, and I think countries need liquidity, you know, hey, there's an asset that's not doing anything for the citizens.
The G6 central banks have stopped selling this barbarous relic, and now non-G6 central banks are buying gold hand over fist. Brazil, Russia, India, China, even South Korea and Mexico have been buying gold. The BRICS nations are setting up their own IMF and SWIFT system, as they know that the dollar is going to fail. Bill Gates then rambles on and keeps going back to his talking point about it being purely psychological.
You know, because it's purely psychological, it's not like people would say, oh, well, when it gets to $800 an ounce, people will buy 4 times as much jewelry. There's no, nothing that steps in as a buyer at any price. It's just purely, oh, other people in the future will think it's worth more than it's worth today. Which, you know, if you think the world is scary and people are going to panic, I'm not saying that theory doesn't exist, but there is no floor if ever people got a view. And
well, Bill, if it was purely psychological, why do central banks hold it at all? Gold is the most liquid reserve asset in the world. I mean, even enemies trade gold. It is not so much that the price of gold is going up, but it is the value of the dollar that is going down, and the greater fool theory is not a great reason not to buy gold. The greater fool in this case is the people that keep their wealth in the paper casino, hoping against all odds of hitting it big in this rigged game. He finally puts himself out of misery talking about supply concerns 10 to 20 years from now.
As this price gets high and you look at a 10 to 20 year time frame, the supply equation will change. And so the bulls have to offset the fact that there'll be quite a bit, not in the near term, but over a period of time. And these people are claiming that they can predict gold prices out into the future, which certainly with equities you can feel like you can. Well, there you have to understand the innovations in digital mining techniques or some new extraction techniques, which actually I think are pretty interesting, and I doubt many people factor that in.
The only digital mining techniques that gold and silver investors care about is the digital alchemy Ben Bernanke can create with his QE iPhone app. What Bill does not mention is why both him and Warren Buffett invested in silver at all. This proves that they know a lot more about silver than they're leading on to. I mean, if they came out and said that they owned a little bit of gold, I would write them off as just having a balanced portfolio. But these men went in and bought silver, and in a big way. There's a lot of educational process that goes into that investment. It is certainly not an investment that people wake up one day and say that I'm going to go out and go buy silver like they would with Apple stock. Both Warren and Bill, for all their talking, never say why they invested in silver and the real reason why Warren Buffett sold out. The financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for owners of wealth to protect themselves. This is the shabby secret of the welfare state's tirades against gold. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the statist antagonism towards the gold standard. Alan Greenspan.
You mentioned the high tide, the low tide. Where are we right now? Would it be a better idea to jump into equities at this point, or something like gold, which, by the way, hit a record high today?
I don't have the slightest interest in gold.
The real reason why Charlie Munger does not have any interest in gold is because if enough people followed the silver bullet and the silver shield and sold their paper assets and bought real tangible wealth, the predatory collectivist scheme that he rides on top of would fail.
And I don't see how you become rational hoarding gold. Even if it works, you're a jerk.
Unfortunately for Charlie, the sophomoric high school social pressure of calling someone a jerk is a weak defense of that system.
Mr. Munger, under President Bush, just before he left office, as you know, there was a $750 million bailout, and then since President Obama came into office, another $750 million. In your opinion, would it have been wiser to bail out Main Street and, let's say, the government extending like a student loan to houses who are facing foreclosure, forfeiture, or eviction for renters, rather than bailing out Wall Street?
Well, I think you got it exactly wrong. I think those bailouts were absolutely required to save your civilization and to give you the best chances of solving the housing and student loan and other problems. I think that was absolutely required, and we were lucky that both administrations were as wise and bold as they were. So you shouldn't resent that. You should thank God they did it. And I think if you understand the system and the dangers it was in, you would recognize that that's the least of that. That was your blessing. Get the economy with enough misery, get enough disruption, destroy the currency. God knows what happens. So I think when you got troubles like that, you shouldn't be bitching about a little bailout. You should have been thinking it should have been bigger. I mean, those people were working for you, and they were in both parties. They were a credit to both of us that all that happened.
What an arrogant ass. To sit there and tell college students that are racked up with $1 trillion worth of debt, with an economy that's been destroyed, and to tell them that we should be somehow grateful that we bailed out your ass, and that we should be grateful that the criminal elite owns both parties, and stuck the bill for their irresponsibility on our backs and our future? Why is this guy held in such high esteem?
Now, if you talk about bailouts for everybody else, there comes a place, if you just start bailing out all the individuals instead of having to adapt, that the culture dies. I don't know where it is, but at a certain place, you got to say to the people, suck it in and cope, buddy. Suck it in and cope.
We should have told you to suck it in and cope instead of bailing you out. Moral hazard is where there is a tendency to take undue risks because the costs are not borne by the party taking the risk. Insiders like Munger and Buffett have always had enough sway in both parties to call in favors to save their asses when their bets turn horribly against them. Because of the implicit backing of these crony capitalists by the Fed in both parties, they can continue to bet on assets and consolidate power, knowing that if they get too big enough, they can always run to the tit of Washington or the Fed to bail them out. The line they always sell us is that their collapse would bring about systemic counterparty risk that would end the entire system. Well, they are right about that, And ultimately, that's what needs to happen. One way or the other, the system is going to collapse from the mathematical nature of either too much debt or printing too much money. So when Munger talks about our culture dying if there was no bailout and to suck it up, I would argue that our culture has been dying for years. We need to spit out this cancerous money and the crony capitalists along with the system and institutions that empower them. What exactly is it that we should be saving in this civilization? Is it the arrogant crony capitalists raping humanity with their debt schemes? Is it our jobs shipped overseas to slave labor countries like China? Is it the 43% of Americans that are obese? Is it the 26 million Americans on antidepressants? Is it the multiple and endless wars we're fighting? Is it the $1 trillion worth of student debt that is destroying the lives of our youngest generation? What exactly is worth holding on to? There is only one thing in nature that takes more than it needs, and it is cancer. Our way of life is a systemic cancer that has already destroyed a once healthy population of the United States. All of the ills in the world can be traced right back to the very nature of our cancerous debt-based currency, and the power it gives to those that pull the levers. Just as Greece would be better off to dump the euro, the world would be wise to dump all debt and let the cards fall where they will. Yes, there will be a few months or years of upheaval, but humanity on a whole will be much better off if they dump the debt, got rid of usury, and let the too big to fails like Charlie Munger fail.
Now, if you talk about bailouts for everybody else, suck it in and cope, buddy. Suck it in and cope.
So in his world, it's socialism for the rich and capitalism for the rest. In a truly capitalistic free market society, the Federal Reserve would not exist, and there would be no too big to fails. And Charlie Munger would have been broke right now instead of arrogantly talking down to us. But we don't have a free market. We have fascism, which Mussolini defined as the merger between corporations and state.
Get the economy with enough misery, get enough disruption, destroy the currency, and we ended up with Adolf Hitler.
Munger tries to scare us with Hitler, but I bet you that when the collapse does happen, Munger, Buffett, Gates, and the rest will vocally support our new Hitler, just as the American and English industrialists and bankers that supported the rise of Hitler. They will fully stand behind any seizure of power we will get with the next crisis.
Civilized people don't buy gold.
They say that we're buying gold and silver because we're scared, uncivilized investors, but the reality is the only ones that are scared are the ones with the most to lose when this Ponzi scheme fails. Behind the billionaire smiles and the bootlicking CFR reporters is a sense of desperation as the masses are starting to wake up and reject the shit that they're selling. CNBC viewership is down from 355,000 viewers in 2000 to now just 99,000 viewers. The only reason why that station is on the air is so the elite can push propaganda like this. They use their corporations to fund the channel so that people stay within the consumer debt instant gratification fast money paradigm. Without this constant hopium, the criminal elite know that their way of life is over. Their bonuses, their jets, their fancy dinners, their bootlicking yes men, their perks, and all of it ends when people walk away from their paradigm. The silver bullet and the silver shield is a non-violent, non-compliant way to defeat the death and debt paradigm through individual leaderless resistance. Those that understand the system will either be so interested in its profits or so dependent upon its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. While on the other hand, the great body of people, mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantages that capital derives from the system, will bear its burdens without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is imbecile to their interests. Lord Rothschild. Stop listening to the fat cats that are either interested in the system's profits or dependent upon the system's favors. You'll never hear the truth from them. And thankfully for the internet, a great body of people are mentally capable of comprehending the tremendous advantage that capital derives from the system. And we will no longer bear this burden without complaint. When people realize that it is them that needs us, and that we're holding up their system, becoming empowered and walking away is very simple. We have to be of the opposite consciousness. If debt is the problem, equity is the solution. If collectivism is the problem, individual liberty is the solution. If war is the problem, peace and understanding is the solution. If too big to fail is the problem, then the most powerful aspect of the free market, of failure, is the solution. Another analogy would be Nero fiddling while Rome is burning. Warren Buffett fiddles away to make light of a civilization in crisis by playing smoothing tunes to support the system a little bit longer. I believe that history will judge men like Buffett, Munger, and Greenspan in a very different way than the worshiping these men have had most of their lives. I can only hope that they live to see the consequences of their actions. I can almost hear the denial coming out of their mouths like Rudolf Hess at the Nuremberg trials. But after all these attacks, Buffett finishes the segment with this.
Incidentally, they're right to be afraid of paper money. I mean, they have their basic premise that paper money around the world is going to get worth less and less and less over time is absolutely correct. But
you just disagree with the investment theory beyond that.
Yeah. Where they run from that, and they should run from it, is where, in my view, they make the mistake. But they have a correct basic premise.
Well, no shit we were right about fiat money. That is the whole point of us not investing in paper assets. Because if you can't trust the world's reserve currency, all paper assets, institutions, and markets are at risk. The mathematical, inevitable collapse of the dollar is coming, and the ramifications of this will be the single largest event in human history. I have stated this many times, but it cannot be stated enough. Our debt-based monetary paradigm must create more debt every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before, or the system will suffer the systemic risk of the mother of all margin calls. The compounding nature of this simple idea leads us to the mathematically inevitable end, where debt either becomes so large that we'll default on it, which no nation that prints its own currency for the debt has ever done, or we will continue to print money, so much so that the currency loses all of its value and the system collapses. Either way, the dollar paradigm is doomed. There is no way to reform or solve this problem short of these two outcomes, and that is the fat tail risk Bernanke talks about.
The reason people hold gold is as a protection against what we call tail risk, really, really bad outcomes. And to the extent that the last few years have made people more worried about the potential of a major crisis, then they have gold as a protection.
I think those bailouts were absolutely required to save your civilization. And I think if you understand the system and the dangers it was in, you would recognize that that's the least of that. That was your blessing.
What would have happened potentially?
We don't know, but it could have been awful. I don't even want to think about how awful it could have been.
That is the fear the markets are feeling, and that is why the criminal elite are attacking the one lifeboat, because the more people that stay inside this confidence game, the longer their privileged positions can be maintained. One interesting point I want to make sure that people understand about the eventual flight to gold and silver is that most bull markets are fueled by greed, but when a currency collapses, both greed and fear drive it. That is why it's so explosive and final. Once faith is lost in a currency, people will flock to the only successful and longest lasting money like gold and silver. Now that you've heard from enough paradigm puppets, let's listen to what the puppet master says.
On the other hand, if you're very safety conscious, you hang on to your gold bars.
I would like to finish this segment with the prediction. When the dollar does collapse, we will be given two false choices. One, of either a banker gold standard, or two, some sort of nationalist, fascist digital card currency.
What if we got rid of cash? After all, cash is what keeps terrorists, drug dealers, and gun dealers in business. Could a move to a cashless economy around the world help America?
Neither one of them are a solution, nor are they the problem. Another monopoly currency, whether it is a gold standard or some sort of digital fiat currency, is not the answer. The answer lies into competition of currency. There should be allowed to have gold, silver, copper, platinum, debt-free treasury notes, local community currencies. Competition in currency is the solution for this problem. Ending usury is a solution to this problem. Ending fractional reserve banking is a solution to this problem. Ending too big to fails is a solution to this problem. Unfortunately, none of these solutions will be implemented before the final collapse, and it is up to you to both physically and mentally prepare for this collapse.